Andrea, can I ask you a question first? We've talked before about whether or not collaborating with companies inside of Switzerland versus outside of Switzerland is different in terms of maybe corporate environment or the eventual terms of a research agreement, say, in terms of IP and IP sharing. Do you find that there's any difference between Swiss companies and companies abroad in a broad sense?
Well, yes and no, in the sense that from the contractual perspective, Switzerland has the advantage that contracts are, in a way, simple compared to other countries, other law that by, let's say, nature definition, requires contracts which are much more complicated. That's typical, for example, for common law. So it's very easy to understand a contract with a company in Switzerland, might be quite hard to understand a contract with a company from US or UK. And this is an issue because at a certain point we will have to abide and follow some obligations. And this is up also to the researcher. So we have to make sure that at a certain point, even complex contract can be in a way understandable. And then, yes, there are some issues to be taken into account. One has been, you have been perfectly highlighted, is the risk of basically exchange rate in the foreign currencies. But yeah, there are also solutions like forward exchange rate and these kind of things. Do you know what I'm saying, or?
No, totally. Yes.
Yeah. So it's something maybe we could more put in practice more systematically. So to cover financial risks that are linked to currency, especially these days, yes. And then in terms of IP, that's the other big block. Probably the negotiation with, for example, US and UK counterparts could be easier than some other countries in Europe, for example. Many US universities are very used to work, companies are used to work with US universities, and so we can take benefit from this long experience between US companies and US universities. And so in many cases, and sometimes it's unexpected, but it's easier to agree with US companies than with some other European one. And then, yeah, regarding other countries from like Japan or China, this probably, yeah, every case is different. And for example, I mean, I have a clear case, for example, we have a clear case with Toyota, which is a Japanese company, but we handle with a Brussels office. So we have really a mixture of Japanese and European standards and way of doing. So it's interesting, but yeah, it's not easy to yeah, as in other cases, to put all these situation in a specific class. Yeah.
Very true. Yes, we struggle with this from the research office too. We find that every case is different because for every country and every funding body we represent, we maybe have one contract. This is very different from the SNSF, or, Swiss, where we have hundreds of contracts. So for us, each new contract we receive is a totally new ball game, to use American lingo, in terms of where we go.
Yeah, hi, hello. I have a question for my colleagues from legal service, and this is a question, a perspective of another central service. So we are confronted with PIs that generally, at the award phase, they contact us because they are very happy, they got a grant, and then sometimes they receive contract and we send them towards you, legal. And my question is, what are, let's say, according to your experience, the risks that the researchers maybe they underestimate or they don't see when they sign contracts with, I'm talking more with, let's say, public funder, or something that you really see that you need to explain them because maybe this is not clear to them, and yeah.
Well, it's on my side. It's hard to say. I mean, it's on case-by-case basis because every case is different. But I would say that the usual risks are, I would say, on IP, intellectual property side. We also have some risk regarding the compliance with ethical rules. The legal framework in human research or even data protection. Sometimes it's a bit difficult to explain that there are some rules and I would say this is the main constraints I see in my daily business. But they also have some financial questions, financial aspects, or even and liabilities. Yeah, of course, contractual liabilities, and some indemnification that are put in our contracts. So very legal questions that probably for someone who is not used to these questions, of course, it's a bit difficult. So I would say that IP, ethics, and liabilities, contractual liabilities, are the most important questions in a contract.
Thank you for your presentation. I have actually a very simple question from a perspective of a PhD student. So you've got your grant, you run it successfully, and then the time for publications comes. So as you mentioned, for the most of EU grants, it's required an open access publication. Who to contact first, the research office, the TTO, or the library, when it comes to be sure that your publication meet all the requirements and in compliance with your grant requirements?
This is a very good question. I think in a perfect world, you could reach out to either the library or the research office and you would get the exact same advice. And I think that is true for the very most part. I think if you must come to someone first, the research office is probably the best in terms of cost eligibility for grants. This is our job. This is exactly what we are supposed to do every day. The library does a fantastic job of also knowing those eligibility requirements very well. But again, this is not their day job. In a way, their job is to make sure that open access publication happens in general. Whereas in the research office, it's kind of our core mission to make sure that your cost eligibility criteria are met.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, maybe I can also have a different question, but still for you probably. In terms of international outreach which EPFL has, more or less everything which we've heard today was about academic collaboration, let's say. Is there any connection which EPFL has in terms of connecting to non-academic entities? Like, let's say not purely academic, not universities, but again, like for example, for somebody who's like, PhD student, looking forward to move, but maybe something non-academic, if there is any help or advice we can have.
You're thinking a bit about the transition outside of academia.
Yeah, like can it still research, but let's say, is there anything besides academic? Let's say, which EPFL is able to provide? I mean, after curiosity.
You mean the research and development institutions of big companies, for example?
As one option. Again, so anything different. So is there anything different from what we just purely academic research which we've been hearing today?
Yeah, so first of all, I guess the core service would probably be the Career Center. So they not only help bachelor and master students who are finishing and transitioning, but they'll be able to give really good advice about, say, if you want to go to R&D in a company, or if you want to go to government, or if you want to go to a nonprofit research center, you'll need a different CV to apply to each of those jobs. The Career Center is really great at giving advice of this nature. If you want more general kind of, I guess, philosophical advice about where you should go in a research career outside of academia, this is a different question too.
No, it was more like really in terms of resources, not the philosophical, just, because we didn't hear about it today, so I was just curious what exists.
In terms of funding, this is an interesting question actually. So there are some funding opportunities from the Swiss National Science Foundation or InnoSuisse that encourage the transition outside of academia to industry. So Bridge POC, for example, has a really nice proof of concept funding program for, let's say you make a prototype that you eventually either want to have a startup of your own or that you want to license out. Bridge is a really nice transitionary program for this. If you want to get even closer to academia, to industry, then there's InnoSuisse that has other programs that are quite a bit further on that TRL scale. But in general, in terms of funding, this is the main avenue, is to fund this transition from academia to industry. But if you have more specific questions, you can write to us. We can help.
Sounds good. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Other programs at EPFL also to finance, so the post-PhD and other programs, like for NGOs, if you want to go to this area, for example. There is TIC for Development. This is an institution in the VPI who is organizing, let's say, several fellowships in this area. And we also have EPFL Leaders for Impact, which is a postdoctoral program where research is done close to market for the Sustainable Development Goals and so on. So there are quite some initiatives to not only promote, let's say, the academic career of a PhD student, but also open venues to leadership in other areas.
Okay, in the gap between our next audience question, I might ask a question to Natacha, actually. In terms of kind of international recruitment, is there a target area for EPFL?
You mean at what level? Master's, PhD?
Let's say PhD, for example.
So that's a very good question, actually. We are now working with EdDoc and PhD programs on how we can improve or step up our promotion for PhD students. And I think that it very much depends on the programs. So talking to several program directors, what we see is that depending on the programs, they have interest from students from different regions or different institutions. So this is a work that we're undertaking now, some assessments, and then we'll have some working groups to kind of see how we can improve at the central level with EdDoc and at the program level.
Very nice. And is it different for bachelor and master?
At the master's level, I think we also work more on the websites, on the material that we provide, and also with the partners that we have for student exchange. So this is also a way to promote the master programs at EPFL. But I think that we have I think in general, the master students candidates, we have a lot of them, and they are fairly good. So the idea would be to work on specific institutions, I would imagine, to attract really talents from very good institutions.
And is this more of a focus intra-Europe, would you say, or are there other institutions outside of Europe that are also of interest?
I think it would be both. So Europe, but it's more difficult because there you have already students that are undertaking their bachelor. They usually follow their masters in the same institution, so it's maybe more difficult to attract them. But outside Europe as well, of course, yes, in some regions, yes.
Excellent, thanks. Okay, good. I've got this panel all to myself. This is great. All my questions will get answered. Actually, either Beatriz or Valentin, can I ask you to maybe comment a little bit on dual use? Could you explain what the concept is and when researchers could need to worry about it?
It's a tricky one, thank you. So there is some items, it can be technology or material items that can be used in a military way or a civil way. And these kind of items are called dual-use items. And it's important to identify them because there is some provision, some directive to consider when there is this kind of item in terms of export or publication even. So yes, there is a list of these kind of items. We can identify them, and I will say that it's important to notify when is the case and have a legal input in this. I don't know if
Can you give an example of a dual-use item you've seen recently in a research project?
I have.
I say this because we also have to screen for this at the research office. And researchers find creative ways of creating items that could have a military use. So you have to be quite careful in your screening, I think.
Well, I've just seen recently technology that enables to produce chip, for instance,
Yeah.
and this is listed in the U.S. export laws, because, of course, some countries enacted their legislation which has extraterritorial effect, and that's why we should sometimes comply with U.S. export laws. In this case, we had the provider inform us that this technology is listed in the U.S. list.
If I can complement this, indeed, when we establish a contact with a company from abroad, there are two issues to take into account. There is somehow an incoming issue where basically we have to pay attention to the law of the country of the counterpart, so US in this case. But then in the case you mentioned, but also we have a Swiss law for exports. And we are, when we collaborate even with research, that's already export. And all this looks complicated. In some cases, it's easy because EPFL benefits from a so-called general license from the SICO, so the economic department. And there are some countries with whom we can work, let's say, we have to pay attention maybe more on the reputational side than from the strict legal standpoint. Because we have a license, so we can collaborate with companies in some countries, even if there is some dual use risk. But the difficulty is indeed that there are at least two laws to pay attention, at least in terms of negotiation, Swiss law and then the laws of the other country. As you correctly said, there are a number of laws which are also extraterritorial. So whatever we do and we negotiate, we have to pay attention. Yeah.
And we have time for one last question from the audience.
Okay, thanks very much for all your insights. I have kind of a twofold question. So the first part would be that you said before that you not only help to prepare the grant and to get it, but also follow through. I can very much see that for like project-based grants. Is that also true if the grant is basically based on the scientist itself, so like a postdoc mobility where it's really the person itself which is funded and not project as such? So that would be the first part.
Most certainly, if that project is hosted at EPFL, we treat a research project and a mobility project the same.
Okay. Then the second question is, like especially for like such mobility projects, that's maybe more something for the legal affairs. There's also a lot of it coming if you move to a different country. There's a lot of private things coming with that. I think about if you move to the US, then double tax system and whatsoever. So there's a lot of your personal things which come into hand. So is there also a service which basically provides to look for that, or to check what exactly is there coming? So do you get tax? Do you need to pay your taxes afterwards in the US, or because you get your money from Switzerland, you're still paying your taxes in Switzerland? That's all questions which are kind of tricky to answer. So is there a support for that as well, or is that then up to the applicant himself?
I think for SNSF postdoc mobility, the SNSF itself actually posts some really nice guidelines for this. But in addition, if you had questions, I think HR would be probably the best place to go for questions about taxation or salary questions. Perfect. I think our time is up for the panel. So join me, please, in thanking all our panelists for taking our questions.